2021 has been a year of huge challenges for Indian companies at all levels. On the one hand, they were faced with a consumer or a demand that was just about still recovering but not back to pre-COVID levels in most cases. On the other hand, you had global supply chain shocks that pushed up prices which could not be passed on very easily to unwilling consumers. In the midst of all of this, we are ending the year definitely on a better note than 2020, no doubt about that. Things are looking up, companies are now putting in more money, they're expanding, their debt has pared down. But we also have now this big cloud of Omicron without really knowing what comes next. So what is the outlook for 2022? Will we see those animal spirits rev up? Will private investment, which is really a big missing piece of the puzzle as far as Indian growth recovery is concerned, will that come roaring back? To speak on this, I am joined today by Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Executive Chairperson at Biocon, Sumant Sinha, Chairman and CEO of Renew Power, with me on the show today. I'm also speaking with Vineet Agarwal, President of ASSOCHAM. Welcome to all of you and thank you so much for joining us in this special series playing out on the India Development Debate, where we focus on how 2022 is going to look. Ms. Shaw, let me begin with your outlook. Are you entering the new year more optimistic?
Well, certainly, Tamanna, I am very optimistic because of the fact that, we have now vaccines, we have oral antivirals, we have antibody therapies, we have a lot of ammunition with which to manage the pandemic. And I personally believe that we are managing it fairly well. And I think people can feel far more confident rather than paranoid of really starting to get back to normalcy. And I believe that business can start looking at growth. I also believe that the pandemic has introduced a whole set of new opportunities which are all set in the digital world. I also believe that, we are seeing so many new tech unicorns. Each one has identified a new business opportunity. And what is really exciting for me is the fact that all these tech unicorns are looking at India as their growth market. And that's where they're really focused on, creating market opportunities right here in India. And I have been meeting a large number of young tech entrepreneurs who are relocating from the US and many other parts of the world because they believe the markets are here, the opportunities are here, and of course the software action is here. So I think that's very, very reassuring. I think that's very encouraging in many, many ways. And for me, of course, in the pharmaceutical sector, I look at it very optimistically, because I really believe that global healthcare is going to expand in a very significant manner. And I think whilst everyone's focus has been on COVID management, we have neglected many other disease areas which will now start getting attention. So I, for one, believe that this sector is going to grow very rapidly, because I think health equity is also something that everyone is very focused on. And that's why I think I have this kind of optimism as we get into the new year.
Mr. Sinha, what do you think would be the major themes for any big business in 2022? We've seen 2021 truly as the push for a digital front to any business, a move to technology. Do you see that persisting for you, especially in the green energy and the clean energy space? Do you think that 2022 will be a pivotal year?
Yeah, so let me just try to address both the questions that you asked there. First, about whether digital is an area that is going to be something that will grow in all sectors. And the answer to that, I think, is absolutely yes. Partly because of the reason that Kiran talked about, which is that there are so many new unicorns that are being created that almost every young Indian at this point is probably thinking about which area they can come out with in terms of starting up their own venture. And I'm sure, therefore, that the bright young minds will come up with many, many different opportunities. Equally, larger companies are thinking about how they need to improve and increase their own digital footprint, just like we are in our area. And so I think you will certainly see the proximity or the closeness between businesses and their digital avatars, in a sense, really increasing a lot more in the future. So I think that is something that definitely will happen. Now, to your second question on what do I expect will happen in our sector, look, our sector is on a real tear at this point in time. We are growing very rapidly. Last year was a COVID impacted year. This year was not. I mean, it was, of course, but there was enough of the year in which we could actually get a lot of capacity built out. So I think I won't be surprised if this year we see anything between 15 and 20,000 megawatts of capacity getting added. And I would imagine that next year, if there is no COVID related disruption, we'll probably see an even bigger capacity happening next year. So I think our sector is doing very well. Now with the PLI scheme, there'll be people getting into the manufacturing side, so that'll broaden the market out. And then the one missing piece, however, still remains the distribution reforms. And we were really hoping that the Electricity Act, as it was earlier configured, would be something that the government would be able to pass. But it looks like it might not happen immediately, or it might go through in a different form. And the distribution sector reforms will perhaps not be addressed as we might have hoped for. And to me, that still remains one of the most significant pieces of reform of the Indian economy that is not happening. And that is, in fact, in some ways also holding back overall growth in the economy, simply because power is a sector that feeds into every other sector. And if power prices stay high, that obviously impacts everybody else. So I think that is one thing that may not happen. But I think beyond that, I think that our sector will do quite fantastically well.
All right, I'll come back to all of you with expectations from government and from the budget. But first, let's talk a bit about impact of Omicron. Mr. Agarwal, are you going into the new year worried about whether the pandemic or COVID-19 will continue to be a persistent theme? There are voices saying that this should be the year that we will end the pandemic. I mean, we leave it to the scientists to know whether that will happen or not. But in terms of business, do you think that you have moved beyond it and learned to live with it, or does it still configure in when you look at strategy?
Hi, Tamanna. It's a pleasure to be here. I think there is an element of uncertainty that always creeps in when you have something like the COVID virus that has been there. And it does play into strategies for almost every company in some form or the other. And also it is important that it is part of the strategy as well, because it could lead to disruptions. And we've seen that any kind of disruption that has happened previously in the first wave, in the second wave, in the first wave, supply chains were completely broken. Everything had come to a stop, and that took a few months for things to come back to some semblance of normalcy. In the second wave, we've learned better, and factories were open, trucks were running, logistics was on. So that helped to really counter that quite well. However, we did see there was a big mismatch between demand and supply, which led to the shortages of semiconductors, or for that matter, containers across the world. It's a classic bullwhip effect in logistics, as they call it, which means that any kind of disruption or anticipated disruption in the coming year would need to be thought about. It needs to be, contingency plans need to be put in place. I think in the past we used to have plan A, now you have to have a plan B as well, or possibly a plan C. Companies need to start looking at how not wide their supply chains are, because that could cause disruptions, but how deep your supply chains are. So which means that do you know your tier 2, do you know your tier 3 suppliers, because those can cause problems. So clearly there is an element of disruption that is planned into strategies now. Also, clearly we are not out of the woods yet. I think there are few companies that have emerged, or few sectors have emerged and gone down to the pre-pandemic levels, but many sectors haven't. For example, the services sector, hospitality, aviation, they're still really behind in terms of catching up, which means that capacity utilization overall in the system is still low. It is not yet to that level that capex can start again. So in anticipation that the new virus variant will not be that disruptive, should help us to start thinking that we should be more positive about the next year. And even in situations like this, and even working in our country, we always have to be an eternal optimist. So clearly, this is a time that all strategies need to be quite dynamic in terms of its view.
I think one clear reason for thinking things will be better is the return of demand to a fair amount of degree. But the challenge could be, and let me come to you with this question, Ms. Shaw, of the kind of jump up in input costs we've seen. Now, inflation seems to be a global phenomenon, here to stay. We know interest rate shocks may follow next year in the United States, have their impact on Indian markets, etc. But in terms of input cost hikes, that a lot of sectors have not been able to pass on completely. You think that dilemma will persist?
You're right. I mean, inflation is one of the worrying signs that are emanating from the pandemic. And as you said, this is going to be compounded further by increasing interest rates. So I think we are keeping a watch on increasing input costs. I think, as also Vineet just mentioned, there are many other supply disruptions. So I think that's also keeping capacity underutilized, or production or productivity at lower levels. So I think all these are things which everyone is focused on, and hopefully things will return to sort of pre-COVID levels in the new year, given that we don't get any more shocks. So right now I feel optimistic because I feel we have learned lessons, and I hope we can feel more confident about managing the pandemic better. But having said that, I think there are many other challenges that companies are facing. I think this whole digital revolution that's taking place around the world is also causing a talent shortage. I think, the new sort of various remote working models is also causing a lot of disruption in the workplaces. So I know that companies are actually trying to address many kind of unexpected challenges, but at least beneath it all is an increasing demand. So I think that's what gives most sectors the hope of growth.
Mr. Sinha, if I were to ask you what the key challenges would be, and some of them Ms. Shaw has spoken about, the persistent increase in input costs, the shortage of talent, what would be the other factors that you think would be challenges that companies need to grapple with?
Well, I think several things. Of course, first and foremost is the impact of COVID. How deep might it be? How sustained might it be? So I think that's the most obvious one. The second, of course, is the whole issue of the supply chain impact. And there it's not just the fact that prices are going to go up, but that prices might be very volatile, because to the point that Vineet was making earlier, as demand suddenly picks up, supply chains might not be able to cope with it, as we've seen happening already. And so you may have prices going up and down quite dramatically over time. So that is going to lead to a much more difficult environment within which to do long-term planning. The third thing really is around the issue of rising interest rates, because as the Fed is now, and global central banks are now moving into the era now of taking liquidity out of the markets, interest rates inevitably are going to go up. So you'll have a situation where inflation is going to go up substantially, interest rates are going to go up. So as a result of that, a lot of your input costs are going to change quite dramatically. Now, the offsetting factor hopefully is going to be demand growth, as we've discussed right now. And the question is, how much of that demand growth is going to be there? How sustainable will that be? And how much might it offset some of these other factors? So I think that is the issue that we'll have to wait and watch and see how next year evolves. But I think behind all of that, to some extent, also is going to be government policy. Within this kind of very dynamic environment, what view does the government take on fiscal deficits, for example? What view does the RBI take on increasing its monetary policy? And those will also have a big impact on the macro environment. And so I think those are the factors that we'll have to watch out for quite carefully and see whether we can work around that or not. So let's see. It's going to be an interesting year.
It's going to be an interesting year. It's going to be a challenging year. I just want to get your view, Vineet, and touch upon another important aspect. What the workplace is going to look like or continue to look like in 2022? Are we going to have this hybrid model of some people working from home, some people working from office continue? Is that making sense for companies now? Is the demand for talent going to be at the forefront of challenges?
Absolutely. This hybrid model is here to stay. It's not going to mean that, even if you have a virus or not, there are some companies that have completely moved to hybrid. There would be some companies, especially in the hospitality sector, logistics sector, etc., where you have to be completely offline, rather. You have to be completely on the ground because you cannot operate online. So it all depends upon the sector. Yeah. And mostly, I think a lot of the corporates at the corporate structure level would possibly move to a hybrid model. But, in terms of experience and when I talk to other people also, a strategy cannot be made by sitting in front of a computer. You need to really sit across with your team. You need to go and visit your customers. You need to see what's happening. And that's how you decide on what you want to do going forward. So some of that has to happen and does happen and will continue to happen. Talent is always a shortage. I think the three sectors right now that is really, really hot in terms of talent is clearly one is the IT sector, where there's a huge amount of crunch in terms of availability of people and the right quality of people. The second is in the media and communications. Social media is just going through a massive boom, and we are seeing that there is a crunch there. And the third, to some extent, in logistics, where because of the whole shift towards omni-channel, we are seeing that on home deliveries or just the use of warehouses or the use of fulfillment centers, etc., have just accelerated exponentially in the last possibly 18 months. So these three sectors, and I'm sure perhaps Sumant will vouch to, maybe, I know there's a shortage of people in the ESG as well sector. So there is some sectors which are really feeling the pinch in terms of talent.
So all three sectors which are represented in a sense in this panel are definitely going to see a great year ahead and have already been seeing that uptick because of the situation that we're in. Nevertheless, I must ask what you would want to see from the policy side. So, Ms. Shaw, let me begin with you. The budget 2022 is going to be the big event of the year, will kick off in the first couple of months itself. Everyone waits for that. What would you like to see in terms of direction coming in from the finance minister, especially considering how much is being said about private investment not kicking in yet, capex not kicking in yet to the extent it should?
So Tamanna, first and foremost, I think the government has announced the PLI scheme and many sectors are benefiting from it. Our sector is really asking for research-linked incentives, and I hope that the government actually rolls it out, because I do know that they are giving it a serious consideration. But more than anything else, I think we do need to focus on taxation across the board, because we are still a very highly taxed nation. And if you want to see a lot of these investments coming into various sectors, I think you do need to look at ease of doing business. I think it's still very, very complex. And I also look at certain sectors like the startup sector, where I think various taxations on startups, on angel investors, VCs, I think they have to ease that a bit more. So I think tax, certainly tax shares when they are sold, but just to basically start taxing notional valuations is not going to really be conducive to more investments. So I think we need to look at taxation as a broad kind of area, ease of doing business broadly, because we are still not in that kind of a zone where we can say it's easy to conduct business in India. It is still not easy to run a business in India. We know that many international companies who try and set up shop in India struggle with all the various rules and regulations. So I do hope that we can see some big moves there. I know that the Prime Minister is very seized of these kind of requests from India Inc. and various other sectors. But I would like to see those coming into the budget. Of course, we are talking about industry, so I'll confine my comments to industry. But obviously, as someone who's very invested in healthcare, I would like to see health spending increase. I think it has increased substantially because of vaccinations. But I think we need to really focus on improving our healthcare expenditure, given that we want to come out with the universal healthcare model, where right to healthcare is something we want to really address in terms of quality healthcare. So I think there's a lot to be done. Of course, there are many areas that we need to focus on: education, health, and of course, but I'm going to just focus on business.
Healthcare will definitely be a big part of it. It is a continuing challenge that the world and India has realized, hopefully, after COVID-19, on how we need to make our infrastructure more robust. Mr. Sinha, would you like to tell us what you hope to see from the next budget?
This is a question that we get always at this time of the year, and it becomes a big deal. I really don't know. I think that, policy making is happening all the way through the course of the year now. And I think you have to look at the totality of what the government does over the course of the year, rather than only what they announce in the budget. Of course, if they announce great things, that's terrific. But I can tell you what I'd expect the government to do in general in policy making. How much of that they choose to put into the budget is, of course, their decision. But I can tell you that in our sector, for example, there was the announcement of the National Hydrogen Mission. So we'd like to see more details of that. We'd like to see mandates coming in for green hydrogen. So user industries, refining companies, steel companies, cement companies should actually be asked to move a certain amount of their consumption of grey hydrogen into green hydrogen. I'd love to see, as I said earlier, reforms on the distribution side. But that's sort of pending with the Act. I'd love to see the fact that customs duties on batteries would come down to enable the creation of the storage market as well as the electric vehicle market. Also the same on electrolyzers for hydrogen, green hydrogen manufacturing, customs duty coming down. I'd love to see GST coming down on renewables. It was increased from 5% to 12%. It's making it more expensive. I'd love to see that come down, but again, that's a GST issue. So that certainly will not be put in the budget. I'd love to see more allocations for more PLI schemes so that we actually can develop a robust manufacturing industry in whichever sectors the government chooses to make those investments. And I'd love it if the government chooses to invest more in infrastructure and in general, and chooses not to decrease the fiscal deficit to a very low number, and because we still require that expansionary stimulus at this point in the economy. So those are some of the things that at least I would be looking at in general. But I think more broadly for the country, of course, we need more spending on the social sectors, on the education side, on the health infrastructure. Of course, the government has done a lot, but given the status of where we are, there's always more that can be done in all of these areas. So let me stop there.
So Yes, you are absolutely right. This is a question which is almost seasonal. We talk about it every year, but the reason why it's important also is because it gives us a chance to focus on what needs to be done, and hopefully some of it is reaching the policymakers. So with having said that, Mr. Agarwal, I'm sure you have a list as well.
Yes, certainly, because at the chamber at ASSOCHAM, we do get a lot of requests from members for lots of areas. But I think I'll just take a step back and really we have the benefit of hindsight to see what a strong budget it was last year, or rather earlier this year, because there was a huge challenge of the COVID. There was the deficit challenge, but I think the finance minister came out with a very insightful, deep, as well as very transparent budget, because in the past we did not really know what the real deficit numbers the sector were, and those got really clarified in this last budget. So I think some of that should continue. The transparency is important because that gives policymakers and just even international investors a perspective that the country is moving in the right direction. The second is that from a chamber perspective, we've also looked at how can we reduce regulatory friction in any scheme in any way possible. The government introduced and reintroduced the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, and that was a huge success. We are recommending the same for highly litigious sectors like telecom, infrastructure, and even things like customs, where there are cases that have been stuck for the last 10, 15 years. And if those are solved in the same manner as it has happened for the income tax, we can see a huge amount of confidence that will get built up with domestic and international investors that India is a great place to invest to. I reiterate what my other panelists, Ms. Shaw and Sumant, have said in terms of the other areas. And infrastructure, with the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the PM Gati Shakti program, and the PLI schemes, this is a time that we really need to see that on the ground implementation of infrastructure money needs to hit the road. And that's where the allocations are very critical, especially in things like the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, etc., because that will ensure linkages to the farm and also cause an inclusive growth that we've been talking about. So lots of areas, but I think let's see what comes out of the hat in the next few months.
Yeah. The whole situation of making that wish list and communicating it is sometimes also important. But what will come out of in the budget is a discussion for a different day. But we started by talking about the outlook for 2022. At the end of this discussion, at least we can say with some confidence that it looks like it's upbeat. Yes, there will be challenges on the way, but the preparation for them seems to be better than ever before. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks.